Hi everyone. Lovely to see so many of you join us today for the second session of our Lunch and Learn series for our clients. I'm Lauren. I work in the marketing team at CX Partners. So the purpose of this series is to offer a program of learning to our clients. Not only does it mean that we can share some of our knowledge and expertise with you, but it'll mean that you can get more out of the work that we're doing together. So this month we're exploring the question, how can we conduct inclusive user research? And I'll hand over to our speaker, Chloe, in just a moment. We'll be running another session in November and we'll send out details about this in the coming weeks. We'd love to hear from you as well, though. As always, it's great to get your feedback. So does the time work well for you? Do you like the format? And of course, what topics would you like to see us cover in the future? So please drop any feedback or thoughts in the chat or email them over to us at marketing@cxpartners.co.uk, which you should all have in your inbox. So moving on to today's session, our speaker today is Chloe Langan. So Chloe is a senior UX consultant at CX Partners, and she has vast experience working with both clients from financial services organizations and also in the public sector, including with the NHS. Her background is in natural language technology, including natural language processing and understanding. And from her experience working in AI and innovation, Chloe has seen firsthand how technology and design have the power to actively exclude or include populations. She's passionate about inclusive design, and she leads a community of practice on the subject within CX Partners, which makes her the perfect person to lead today's session and to answer your questions at the end. Finally, I just wanted to let you all know that this is a one-way webinar, so no one can see you or hear you. So feel free to eat your lunch without the fear that we can see you. And if you have anything you'd like to ask, please do add it to the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of your screen throughout the talk, and I'll pop back at the end and we can go through the questions. So handing over to you, Chloe.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Lauren. I hope you're doing all right today. You've had a relatively quiet day, hopefully, and I hope you're enjoying your lunch as well. I'm looking forward to mine after this, I know. So like Lauren said, I'm here to talk to you about tips for conducting inclusive user research. I'm really excited to talk to you about this today. I know what Lauren said. I feel really passionately about inclusion when we're talking about UX design. And actually being inclusive when running user research and in user-centered design in general is something that we've done quite a lot of work looking into at CX Partners. And I really just don't think that people realize how much of an impact it can have on improving products and services that everyone provides. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hopefully delving into that a little bit more. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about what inclusive user-centered design actually means. And then I'm going to walk you through in more depth some things that we did to explore what we could do to run more inclusive user research. So I'm going to show you some insights that we heard from charities, people who participate in research, recruiters, and actually user-centered design professionals themselves. So that's going to make up the majority of my talk. And then we're going to talk about some of the actions that we took and are taking to help people to be more inclusive in their UCD work. And we'll look at some things that you can be doing too. So hopefully there's something that you can take away from this that then you can put into practice. And we'll hopefully be able to spark some thoughts and reflections as well. So before we talk about how to do inclusive user-centered design, it's probably good to recap on what user-centered design is without the inclusive part. So user-centered design is a methodology for designing products and services that crucially is focused on user needs. So we do discovery, user research to delve more into the problem, and then we rapidly prototype and go back to the user to see how it works for them. So it's all focused around these user needs. So knowing that then, what is inclusive design? It's basically a process it's basically ensuring that what we make is as useful for as many people as possible. So as many of those users as possible, and we're expanding out our user group as much as we possibly can. This focus especially though is on groups of people that have been unable to use services in the past or have been excluded in the past or historically. But why is being inclusive important? I think that's probably one of the questions that I get asked so often. At the crux of it, we want everyone to be able to use the services and products that we make. And when you think about the fact that 24% of people in the UK have a disability, if you haven't taken that into account when designing services, that's a huge portion of your target market that you're not reaching. And that's only one group of people who are historically marginalized or excluded. There are so many different groups of people that have been that are often forgotten about when designing services or overlooked. So yeah, just the fact that you could expand your user base, I think that that's such a key message and such a key thing that makes being inclusive in our user research and user-centered design important. I think more than that, though, is that inclusive design actually improves everyone's experience. So there are so many examples of this. I think one of my favorite ones is that the curb dips that you see on pavements, they were originally designed for people in wheelchairs, but they make life so much easier for people who are pushing prams, who are on a run, if you're using a scooter or a bike, or if you're pulling suitcases even on a pavement. It makes things so much easier. Audiobooks is another great example. They were created for people who can't read or who have sight loss. They weren't really created for people to use who don't have those sorts of things. But I personally listen to audiobooks all the time. I listen to them when I'm on the train, when I'm on a walk, just around the house doing some cooking, like all of those sorts of times is I'm listening to audiobooks, and they weren't even designed for me in mind. And lastly, inclusive design increases people's sense of belonging. People feel like they're welcome to use services and with your organization if they know that the products and services have been designed for them. And if we're designing and researching inclusively, it just increases that sense of belonging and that loyalty to your brand, I guess, your organization. So the key thing for me is that ultimately every design and even decision that we make has the power to include or exclude people. And we have this power as decision makers. I think that's a really important message that we need to remember. So hopefully that's persuaded you that being inclusive is really valuable. We thought that at CX Partners, and to learn more about what we could do to be more inclusive, we did what any user-centered design team would do. We ran research. So we were mainly focused around how we could make user research more inclusive, but we interviewed all kinds of user-centered design professionals, ranging from user researchers, content, user interface, to service designers, to project managers, loads of different types of user-centered design professionals. We also interviewed research participants and charities representing people whose voices were often underrepresented, in research. And we interviewed recruitment partners as well to better understand the sort of process that they go through when recruiting participants for research. And then we took all of these findings from talking to all of these different people to see what we could improve. What we heard from all of these people was extremely insightful and really interesting, and really reflected a few things that we could change. So that is exactly what I'm going to share with you today. So to start off, I'm going to cover what we heard from speaking to charities and research participants, specifically from seldom heard community. So this is people that often we don't hear from them in research. Often we're unable to find participants from certain backgrounds. And we wanted to hear from them what blockers might exist that are preventing them from actually getting involved. So here's a bit of an overview of some of the themes that we heard. We covered how often people don't know how to find out about research opportunities, and that actually people really appreciate having different ways to get involved so that they can find a certain way that suits them for the actual research itself. We heard how participants felt tokenized, so they felt like they were being used to tick a box, but not actually being listened to in what they were saying. And actually, that was also reflected in the fact that we heard how important it is that researchers should be educated on the impact of lived experiences. We also heard how helpful it is to engage with participants before and after the sessions, and how that really actually helps them to feel more comfortable and to feel more included in the process. So I'm going to run you through each of these things in a little bit more detail. The first one was that recruitment as we know it isn't reaching everyone. So lots of people that we spoke to said that they didn't know how to find out about research, and they had absolutely no idea that they could even participate in research until a friend had told them. I think the message here is that we really need to expand our ways of reaching out to people. And if we're only recruiting in one particular way, so like using adverts on social media, we're inevitably going to miss people. So if we, for example, if we are recruiting using adverts and things like that online, it's amazing. It helps us to be much more flexible. It allows us to reach a much wider range of locations, but it does come at the cost of excluding people who often don't have computers, don't have Wi-Fi, or who feel less comfortable using technology. We also heard time and time again that people needed to hear about research through a trusted source. So that could be through friends, but it also sparked the idea that maybe we should be posting adverts in community centres, or actually through charities as well that people have worked with, because they tend to be much more trusted. So similarly to having a wider range of ways that we're recruiting people, we also heard that a wide range of preferences for how people like to engage during the research sessions as well. So whilst technology like Zooms allows you to reach more people from different areas, it does mean that people who don't have access to or who can't use computers won't be able to participate. So perhaps we need to be offering some more in-person sessions if possible. We also heard that some people prefer to speak to researchers one-on-one, because they felt that they might be influenced by others in group sessions. So that's usually how we do it at CX Partners. We tend to go for those one-on-one sessions so that we don't get louder voices, quieter voices, and that sort of thing. But what we did hear was that some people felt like a group session was less pressure, and it actually made them much more comfortable. That was really interesting to hear. It's just people just have they felt comfortable in different settings. We also had this really interesting nugget about safety concerns when running in-person research. So an LGBTQ plus charity that we spoke to said that for trans people who often experience violence and discrimination in public places and in private as well, they may not feel comfortable coming to an office that they don't know, or actually inviting people into their homes just because of these safety concerns that they have. So actually what was recommended was that we should meet people in a place that is familiar to both parties. So something like a community centre or a cafe or something like that, where they're in a public place, they know that they're going to be safe, and they know where they are as well. The next thing we heard was the importance of avoiding tokenizing people from both charities and research participants. So tokenizing basically means that participants feel like they're being included just to tick a box to say, you know, we've spoken to these people, but they feel like they're not actually being listened to, or that they have the responsibility for speaking for the experiences of an entire community just as one person. Participants really wanted in the research sessions for it to come across that researchers appreciate that people don't just belong to one category or group, and actually it's the intersection of belonging to multiple communities that really changes their perception and experiences, and it needed to be appreciated and shown that that is appreciated by the researchers. The charities that we spoke to, though, they did give us some really great suggestions on how to make people feel like they weren't being tokenized. So to make them feel comfortable and to make them feel like a valued voice. So some of those things included involving participants in the conversations that we're having more. Just really find ways to show that ideas were being listened to and to show the impact that they were having. And actually, charities were suggesting that we work more closely with them, so that then we go into the research with a trusted partner, so a person or a charity or an organisation that they trust. So with this in mind, we heard how important it is that researchers are educated on the impact of lived experiences. I think one of the most prominent things that we heard people needed to make participants feel safe and more comfortable is just getting language right. So it needs to be two things. It needs to be welcoming and it needs to be correct. So all of the people that we spoke with recommended that researchers completed training or at least educated themselves on what is important to certain groups. So terminology that is used or terminology that might be deemed offensive and should be avoided. And also just how that group might have experienced something or the platform or the service that you're using, or the sort of realm. I guess health is a good example of that. How certain people have experienced healthcare in the UK is very different depending on what group they're in. So it's really important to educate yourself on those experiences, so you go into those conversations knowing or appreciating more where somebody might be coming from. We also found that asking charities about the needs of communities was really insightful. So that's a really great option as well. And yeah, something to definitely explore. But it's not only the language that we use, but it's also the way that we word questions. So for example, when we use open questions, so we do that quite a lot. We use open questions a lot in user research rather than yes or no questions, so we can sort of delve into things a little bit more. But we heard that some people with autism or Down syndrome really struggle to answer open-ended questions when they're structuring their feedback. So actually you need to pepper in a few of those sort of yes/no questions so that people feel more relaxed and they don't feel like they're getting lost in a rabbit hole as much. And the final insight from charities and research participants was the value of engaging with participants before and after the sessions. So having more information up front about the sorts of questions and topics that they would be covering would really put their mind at ease and would perhaps actually encourage more people to sign up, because there's that fear of the unknown if you don't know what you're speaking about in a session. So it makes you sort of more reserved and less likely to participate. We also heard that a pre-call would be really useful so that people could get to know the researcher and flag any topics that they're uncomfortable discussing, or actually any needs that they might have for the session. So if they use a screen reader, or if they have mobility problems, it means they need to access something on a mobile phone rather than a laptop. All of those sorts of things are great to capture up front. But as well as that sort of upfront communication, lots of people expressed that they would like a way to sort of share follow-up thoughts after the session in case they thought of something afterwards. And actually people really liked hearing about the impact of the work that they were having, the impact of the work that they were involved in and how they fit in and support future changes. And actually we heard that often hearing about that impact of the work was more valued than even being paid to do the session. So that was really interesting. So that was everything we heard from charities and research participants. We also spoke to participant recruitment companies, and this was to really understand what they do in their processes to be inclusive and any pain points that they have that we might be able to address. So from our conversations, we really took away 3 key things. The first one was that recruiters actually have quite a lot of insight around blockers for research participants that we can learn from. The second was that recruiters need information as early as possible to help them. So this was not only so that they could reach out to as many places as possible to find participants, but also so that they could do extra activities before the sessions to put research participants at ease. And then the third one was that, interestingly, recruiters use a variety of methods to find participants. So they're already looking in those different places. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail. So if we talk about blockers first, there were three main recurring blockers that recruiters see for people who want to participate in research, but are ultimately unable to. So they're really keen on participating, but they're being excluded just because of the way that we do it. The first thing that they mentioned was the importance of covering expenses up front. So participants aren't out of pocket if they have to come and meet you anywhere, or if you're running research in person, especially. The second was that actually a lot of people struggle with Wi-Fi connectivity. So having alternatives to Wi-Fi, if people have poor connection, is really valuable. So being able to offer phone interviews as well as sessions over Zoom or in-person sessions. And the third one, but I think maybe the most interesting in my opinion, was that having research sessions that weren't just between 9 to 5 on weekdays. What we heard, and I think you can see from this quote here, is that sticking to 9 to 5 on weekdays basically means that you won't be able to reach certain groups, especially different socioeconomic groups. So having some of these research sessions outside of the 9 to 5 on weekdays means that you'll reach people from much more varied backgrounds. So pop in an early morning session or a sort of later evening session, and actually you'll get to speak to a much wider variety of people. The next thing we heard from recruiters was that they really need time and information as early on as possible to recruit and prepare participants. So recruiters said that it usually takes 2 weeks for them to do everything they need to do to recruit participants. If we give them that amount of time or more, then they'll be able to go out into these different communities and sort of find participants from a wider range of places. And recruiters also said that they do a lot of preparation with participants. So that could be running tech tutorials or tests, and also briefing participants to reassure them ahead of the sessions. And these sorts of activities were proven to be really helpful to participants so that they just have they feel more comfortable, really. And if we give participant recruiters a more comprehensive brief and more time to partake in these activities, it just means that their interactions with participants will be more positive and welcoming, which is especially important because the participant recruiters are usually the first people that participants interact with when we're talking to them. Interestingly, like I said before, we also found that recruiters use a variety of methods to contact people. So they actually talk to community groups and charities. They promote on social media. They actually go out on the streets. They go out on location and hire people. And this is fantastic because it increases the ranges of people that will hear about research, and also increases it increases the places that we'll be able to get participants from. We spoke to a few different recruitment companies though, and they did have differing reliance on using these different sort of methods and how frequently they do that. So it's definitely worth asking people before you go into these, just so that you're aware of where there might be gaps or where you might be able to fill a hole. So that was participant recruitment companies. To round off all of the insights, the last thing that I wanted to share is what we heard from user-centered research and design professionals. So this was a mixture of internal practitioners from CX partners and also some external people that we spoke to, including clients and people, user-centered design professionals that work in different places. And what we were really looking for in these sessions was what blockers exist preventing people from being more inclusive. I think we could put so many great things in place to address what we heard from participants and charities and recruiters, but they might never get done if there are certain things that go on inside of our teams that prevent them. So we were really looking at ways that we can create tools and help user-centered design professionals so that then we're being as efficient as we can with finding ways to approach being more inclusive. So here's an overview of the themes again. So we heard that firstly, inclusive design needs to be embedded into the ways of working and not seen as an add-on that's sort of optional. And on that theme, it feels like inclusion will take more time and budget, which can be a massive blocker, if not the biggest one that I think I come across. And I know lots of people can probably resonate with that. We heard about the importance of having team members with diverse lived experiences and backgrounds. And we also heard a few things around checking our unconscious bias and knowing how to do that. Finally, we heard that people wanted to avoid tokenism, which is something that popped up in the research that we did with participants and with charities. So their user-centered design professionals knew that participants probably felt this way, but they don't always know how to approach it or how to help with that. So that was quite a big blocker. So if we start off with this one, inclusive design needs to be embedded into our ways of working. So participants, well, I say participants, user-centered design professionals wanted to make it a normal part of what we do. So people feel empowered to make sure their projects are inclusive. And so it gets to the point where it doesn't feel like it takes extra time. I love the quote for this one too, so I'm going to read it out. So it's a shift of thinking rather than seeing it as an add-on. That's the thing we have to do. It's more like, this is who we are. We're always inclusive. We're always accessible. That's just not even in question. I think that's a great quote. And yeah. So to build on that, I think there's a fairly universal perception amongst UCD professionals that inclusion will take more time and budget. So when people felt crunched, whilst they found the value in inclusive UCD, they felt like they were forced to make compromises. And this comes back to what I spoke to a second ago. So we need to think about how we make inclusion work in our current practices so that it doesn't take more time. And we also need to ensure that the people that we're working with appreciate the value that we get from being inclusive in research. So it's getting to the point where it's not questioned. So yeah, it's just part of who we are and what we do. The next insight we heard was around the importance of having team members with diverse lived experience. Being constantly surrounded by people with different experiences really prompts researchers to question their thought processes and assumptions. And we also heard that participants feel more able to open up and be honest when speaking to someone who understands or who has shared experiences to them. And this is especially prevalent when you're discussing more personal or sensitive topics. This fourth one is quite a big one. So unconscious bias manages to find its way to interfere with everything that we do. And by definition, it does that without us knowing. So UCD professionals we spoke with were very aware of unconscious bias, but they didn't always know the best way to check for it. So something that we've done in one of our projects recently that worked really well was that we wrote our discussion guide. Well, when we wrote our discussion guide, we made a list of hypotheses and assumptions that we'd made throughout it afterwards. So we sort of annotated it as we went through. And then after we'd done that, we went through and we checked those hypotheses and assumptions for biases that could come up and that could ultimately affect our research. It was incredibly useful. I would definitely recommend people doing that. And it really didn't take very long, maybe half an hour or so. But it's really simple exercises like this that not all UCD professionals are aware of. So it's about finding really quick, easy ways to address unconscious bias and let people know about them. Finally, people wanted to avoid tokenism, but didn't always know how. So often when we recruit participants, to ensure that we're talking to a wide range of people, we do have a list of characteristics that we want recruiters to find participants that represent. So ultimately, we are ticking boxes. And UCD professionals felt really uncomfortable about that, but they didn't really know how to make things better. They wanted to have clear guidance on, should we be using these sort of tick box exercises to find people, or are there other ways that we can make people feel much more valued, and that we can address this sort of feeling of tokenism that people experience? So that was a lot of information that I just ran through, and we heard so many really interesting things. But I think the big question that we wanted to ask ourselves was, what could we do about it? There was a lot of things that popped up there, but actually, what could we put into practice to make things better for everyone? So we went through a process of ideation to really take the pain points and the constraints that we'd heard from the interviews and to come up with solutions that could address these. We came up with over 50 ideas, and that ranged from training, written guidance and templates, peer reviews of inclusion in projects, all the way to sort of slide packs to show the value of inclusion, and meetups with people from across the industry to share their experience. That's a few examples, but we had quite a lot of them. Then we prioritized these and we decided what we would do first. So we started by measuring our team's confidence with inclusion to benchmark it, and to also help us sort of see and track how effective what we put in place was. But actually, it was also really valuable when helping to further persuade stakeholders of the importance of improving inclusion. So yeah, it was just, I think measuring things is always nice. But yeah, it was a really great tool to start off with. We also made a Slack channel where people can raise questions or shout out things that they've tried or seen elsewhere that they want to try, or like talks or resources that they found really useful. And we pulled together a group of people who felt really strongly about inclusion to form our inclusivity or inclusion working group. And this is basically a team that gets together regularly. They push inclusive matters so that we're constantly evolving and we're doing more to be inclusive. And actually together in that group, we've created guidance and templates for people to use in their work. And we've co-created these with UCD professionals internally and externally. So we're trying to sort of build in the experiences of lots of different people. We also started to reach out to charities and develop relationships with them. So we have people and partners that we can go to get insight from, people with diverse lived experiences. So yeah, building out that network with charities has been a really interesting thing that we've started to do. We still have loads of things that we want to do next, but our priorities are these 3 things. So we've been working on some Inclusion 101 training that we're going to be running with our teams very shortly. We've been trialing participatory design practices as well, which is where users are sort of folded into the team and they actually help make design decisions with us, which is fantastic. We're doing some work around that at the moment. And finally, we're working with people across the company to really push our ways of working and our current inclusive policies further. So we're always constantly looking out for and sharing things that we've seen elsewhere that we could do. And we're always challenging ourselves to see what little extra thing we could sort of pick up just to take it that little bit further. So my big question, I guess, is what can you do to help make your inclusive research, help make your research more inclusive and your design more inclusive as well? These are a few really quick and easy things that you can do straight away just to get you started. The first one we've got, speak with charities. This is my #1 favorite thing. They are so knowledgeable, insightful, valuable. They're just fantastic. But I think the main thing as well is that you need to make sure it's mutually beneficial in terms of the partnership. They need to be compensated for helping you. They're often overworked and underpaid, and they need all of the help that they can get, especially if they're providing such value to you. Research lived experiences before speaking to people is the next one. So I'd also recommend actually researching around who's most adversely affected by the topic that you're looking into, by your sort of product and service, and use that sort of research to help inform who you're going to speak with as well. So prioritize some of those groups that you found are most adversely affected. Check your bias is another one. Do this regularly as well. So it's especially important when you're making a decision or designing the discussion guide. So put little reminders in to check your bias at these points. And yeah, you can do like a little calendar thing, or you can ask your PM to help you with that. There's, yeah, just adding in little reminders to check your bias is just really helpful to make sure you're doing that consistently. The next ones are actually about the research sessions themselves. So run some research sessions out of the 9 to 5. That's a pretty simple one. Pop in an early morning session, pop in an evening session, try and get those sessions just slightly different in terms of the timing. Offer in-person video or phone options to participate in research as well. Just another really easy one, especially video or phone. We often do video sessions, but yeah, if you can add in phone options, that really increases your potential people you can speak to. Just going to get some water quickly. Oh, I've been talking for so long. Next one was create a place within your teams to share ideas and questions around inclusion. So start looking out for things and share them with your teams just to sort of get this conversation started. Excuse me. And yeah, just sort of find little sparks that get people thinking about these things. And yeah, it's just really valuable to sort of hear what other people have to say as well. Often people have opinions about these things that you don't really realize until you start talking about it. And last but not least, if you're recruiting participants, start conversations with recruitment companies early and with as much context as possible so that they can have those initial chats that are really valuable and put participants' minds at ease before they come into the sessions. These are only a few things. I said we had 50 ideas. We've got a blog with 50 things in that people can be doing to start being more inclusive, and the QR code will take you there. We got the bit.ly link at the bottom. So yeah, please feel free to follow that. It's got lots of good ideas and tips in there that you can try out. I'm going to move on now, but we'll show that QR code again at the end, just in case you can't catch it. So I've been talking for a while, but what are the main things? What are the main things that I want you to take away? I think firstly, inclusion makes our products and services better for everyone. It's hugely valuable, and hopefully I've shown you why and how it's hugely valuable. However, having said that, it's not easy. But there are some really simple things that we can all do that have a really big impact when designing our products and services and doing user research especially. So hopefully you've seen a few things that you can try out or take away from this session. Or actually, I hope that it sparked a few ideas of your own as well. If you do have any ideas that it sparked, please let me know. I'm always really keen to hear any new ideas that people have. You can pop them in the chat actually if you want to share them. But if not, yeah, feel free to reach out to whoever you're working with at CX Partners and talk to them about it too if it's something that you're interested in. Cool. So that's the end. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that that's been helpful in some way and that you've got some new ideas and reflections. Lauren, do you want to open up for some questions? I don't know if any have come through just yet or...
Yeah, perfect. That was great. Thank you so much, Chloe. But yeah, as Chloe said and I mentioned before, if you do have any questions, please do add them to the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and we can run through them. I can see we've had a couple of questions already, so I'll dive straight into those. The first that we've had, which I think you've actually touched on already, Chloe, but what is the most important thing that you think people should do to be more inclusive?
Yeah, I personally think that I've mentioned it so many times, but just talk to charities, or even just look at charities' websites. They often have so many interesting reports that they've done, or even like, for example, on the I can't remember the charity's name. They work with people who have autism on their, I think it's the National Autistic Society actually. They have an amazing web page on their website which has a load of information about right terminology to use and right language to use. So even just checking their websites is a great thing to do. But I think ultimately charities are they're on the ground, so they really understand the experiences of loads of people, way more people than you're gonna get to speak to in a user research session. So they can really help you to gain a much broader perspective. But they can also guide you on language, like I said, and actually they can also help you get participants who've experienced these different things, especially if they feel really strongly about, or you can sort of prove to them the impact of them being involved, how that will impact them as well. But yeah, like I said, make sure you compensate them, build mutually beneficial relationships, and yeah, I think it's a really great thing to be doing.
Yeah, great, thank you. We've got another one here. Just asking you to expand a bit on what firms can do to avoid tokenizing people.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's probably two main things here. So the first thing is make sure that you're not relying on one person to speak on behalf of an entire community. So for example, if you know that you want to talk to somebody who's experienced sight loss, so who's blind or partially sighted, there are so many different types of sight loss. So people might have lost their sight all in once, or they might have lost it gradually. People might have been born without sight, or perhaps they lost it later in life. They also could have partial sight loss or be completely blind. And all of those things will affect their experience. So having one person who has sight loss and expecting them to talk on behalf of the whole community is just, it doesn't necessarily reflect the needs of everyone. So I think that's a really important thing to know. And then the other thing as well is that we need to amplify what we hear from marginalized groups. So look to primarily address their needs, and people who are in marginalized groups or who feel tokenized, they need to know and feel like what they've said is being listened to. So sending those like emails afterwards that show how the impact that people have had is so valuable. And actually just emphasizing that at the end of a session as well, because people, you might not be tokenizing people, but then if they go away from a session and feel like they've been tokenized, then that's the lasting impact that they're going to have. So yeah, just make sure that you're doing as much as you can to make people feel like they're valued and that they're really being listened to.
Yeah, fab, thank you. That's brilliant. Just looking at the time, I think we've probably got time to run through one last question, and then we can wrap up. Let's have a look. So, are there any business benefits to being inclusive that validate the extra time that you might need to spend when doing inclusive research?
Yeah, so I think we went through a few things there. So inclusion really helps everyone. I think I went through around the fact that 25% of the UK has a disability. So imagine increasing your target market by 25%, especially from a commercial perspective, but also in terms of how far your services are reaching. And I think also the fact that inclusion helps everyone is really quite an important message. So I spoke about audiobooks, I spoke about curb dips, but actually, if you take into account the fact that the average reading age of the UK adults is 9 years old, if you're not designing stuff if your content is aimed at a reading age of anything that's above that, then you're probably going to be missing the majority of adults in the UK. And if you layer on top of that the fact that often we're reading stuff and we're skimming it, we're not even looking at it properly, or we're trying to multitask at the same time, that again reduces the reading age of the content that people will be able to absorb. So you need to just make that the wording of whatever you put out as clear as possible. I think the other thing, so the fact that inclusion helps everyone, if we're talking about disability as well, it's not just permanent, it could be temporary. So you might have a broken arm and you're going to need to use things that are meant for people with permanent disabilities, but actually it really helps people who are in those more temporary situations as well. So yeah.
Oh, fab, thank you. So I've just seen we're at time, but I just want to say thank you so much for today's session, Chloe. It's brilliant. And a huge thank you to everyone else for coming along. We'd love to hear your feedback. And as Chloe said, if you've got any other ideas, please do share them with us. And yeah, we really hope to see you at next month's talk. So yeah, thanks everyone. I hope you have a lovely afternoon.